If there's anybody who should probably stay away from bodywork, it would almost have to be me. But I can't help myself. I really like doing bodywork. It's a sickness. I know. Restoration of a classic Ford is a journey of discovery. Let Auto.krafters help you with yours. We offer quality parts for Falcon, Fairlane, F-Series, Galaxy, Maverick, and Pinto. Contact us today. All right, so what do we have here? This is the final out on the engine bay on our 1965 Ranchero. We will get the top half of it painted. We are not going to concentrate anything below the frame rails, the top of the frame rails. And I say that because we do have some things to finish up underneath the car. We are possibly and probably going to be putting the camber adjustment kit from the guys at Open Tracker Racing in this car to make it so we finally just don't have anything to worry about for caster or camber adjustments whenever we're doing the alignments. But what I'm going to talk about right now is what I have done to this point. Now, I worked on what you saw a little earlier, and I also went in and did a little bit of the body work on this as well. I do not like showing my body work because I don't know if I am at that level yet. I am not comfortable with showing other people what I do and the processes that I use, the way I do them. One thing I will tell you is I use an Evercoat fiberglass impregnated filler. I'll show you the can right here. This is the stuff I use primarily for this sort of thing. I like it for this. It's got a nice feel to it. It does a nice job. I will say that sometimes I have had issues with it wanting to get little pick holes and stuff in it when I'm working it. So it's a little harder on that level. You have to be very smooth with your application. After I do that, I'll hit it a couple of times to get the area surfaced out the way I want it. And then the final thing I'll do is I'll go in and use some Rustoleum filler primer. And this is basically a little bit heavier primer that you can throw a couple of coats down and feather your edges on all your body work. Did I spend a lot of time feathering the edges in this engine bay? I did not, because as I have repeatedly said on this thing, this car is a driver. We're not building a show car here. If I were building a show car, what I'm going to be doing in the next fuse is going to be right out the window. Probably because I won't be doing the body work because I'm not that great at it, least in my opinion. Now, what I'm going to say is this. Because this car sat up for a little while, we did have to go in and do some cleanup using Evapor-Rust on the firewall and the inner aprons that are bare. We let this car sit fallow way longer than you should. If I do a cleanup like this in one day or over a couple of days, ideally what I should be doing is using either acetone or a Precleaner on the engine bay and spraying it within a couple of days, because what will happen, especially if you're in the southeast where the humidity level is very high, your rust is just going to start coming back, even if you kind of protect it. And if you're doing body work in the engine bay, you're going to end up with places where you've put your arm down and the salts from your skin and your sweat are going to possibly cause you some issues. So those are things you need to keep in mind of when you're doing this. The last caveat in that I'm going to talk about before we move on to this and I start showing you some of these things is you're always going to find that one more thing. Every time I do this, I go in and I find something that I didn't remember I needed to do, and I'll show you one of those right now, and that's this spot right here on the back apron. Again, not a show car. Logan's going to be using this to tow a trailer around and go do yards with. So that spot, I'm not that worried about it because I don't think Logan will be all that worried about it. I will possibly show a fix for this down the road when we get a little further down from this using epoxy and a piece of sheet steel, because that's just a cosmetic. It's not anything bad. Next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and hit some of these places that you need to keep in mind of and look out for when you're doing this. All right, so one of the things you're going to find doing this kind of stuff is that you're going to find things right before you go to paint. It's inevitable. I found these that I had forgotten to fill in, and there's a high spot right here where the fender line sits, so I needed to take care of that so that the fender won't sit up on top of that knot of metal. You may even find things after you get done with all of this that are going to cause you some problems. Now I'm going to bring in my little grinder that I got from the guys at Harbor Freight a while back. Always wear hearing protection with these kind of grinders because they're pretty nasty for sound. All right, if I'm going to be really anal about all this, I would probably go in and put some filler in these little areas here, some of the fiberglass impregnated stuff that I like to use. Got to let that cool down a little bit before I do that. And I'll come back in and I'll slather that with a little bit of filler, and then I may have to go in and do some priming and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of what happens. You think you're going to be able to go in and paint right away, and then you start finding little things that need to be done. Those need to be finished off. That needed to be flattened out. Yes, that's a porous weld. It's on this apron. I think it'll be fine because you have these other two that are in good shape. All right, so I'm going to use my Evercoat short fiberglass strand filler. Part number will be down here below me. I'm going to put a little dab of hardener in the middle of it. Not a ton of hardener. A little dab will do you right. There is probably actually more than enough. And you're going to mix it up. I have way more here than I need to do what I'm fixing to do, which is just fill up those two holes that are out there where you can see them. You want to get this to where the blue disappears in the hardener. If you're using a blue hardener, whatever color, you want it to be a consistent tone. I don't know if using pasteboard is a great idea. Some guys use other stuff to do this. Set that there, and I got one down here I've noticed. I'm going to fill that one. Typical of every guy I've ever met. I'm getting filler on my arm. I'm going to wipe this off as best as I can. I'm going to go in and then try to spread this so that I have very little work to do when I go back in. The less I have to sand, the better I feel about it. And I always make up too much every time I've ever done this. Very nearly wiped that on my pant leg. I went ahead and grabbed that one since I got plenty of filler on top there. And there we go. Let that set up, and I'm going to sand it down, and I may or may not prime it depending on what it looks like when I'm done with it. To the trash with you, cardboard. Now, a little tech tip for you when you're doing this kind of thing. These are really good body filler spreaders. They're a nice thin metal. You can see how they do this. I'll leave them like this, and then I'll wire wheel them to get all the junk off of them. I don't know if that's best practices or worst practices. It's just what I end up doing. I don't like the plastic ones because they're still going to have stuff on them after I get done cleaning them up a little bit. The metal ones, I can wire wheel them, and I know I'm good to go on that. I like these. If you can find these anywhere, these are about 15 years old, so I don't even know if they're available in the market still. But if you can find the metal thin body spreaders, I highly recommend them if you're doing this on the occasional. I don't know what the professionals are doing. That's just what I'm doing right here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit it real lightly with some 80. A lot of times with these fillers, the top of the filler, once it starts to set, will get tacky and it'll plug up your paper on your lighter, like 180s and 220s and 400s, it'll actually plug it pretty quickly. So I'll hit it with an 80 grit to knock it back a little bit in all the locations that I'm working. I don't want to do it too much because what will end up happening is you'll have big sanding marks in it after when you go for final. Next up is 180, and a lot of times I'll just skip the 400 if this looks good after the 180. I'm not super worried about this, like I've said before, because we're talking about a real driver here. This is not going to be a concours restoration. Some of you younger guys might even know what concours is, but it comes from the term of concours d'elegance for the high-end cars, Maseratis, Bugattis, Ferraris, all the E name cars. All right, I'm going to 400 that. Roll a sticky back here. And I might go in and hit that with a little bit of primer, but I don't want to if I don't have to. Because these areas are already pretty rough on here. You can look at the top of this, and even some of the spot wells from Ford look pretty rough. So now we're going to move around and keep going through here. I'll probably spend another 15-20 minutes going over the rest of the chassis, finding places that need to be worked on, just like this did and this did. And then I'm going to go in and talk about what I use for pre-prep and all that. Okay? Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wipe my engine bay down with Precleaner because I am going to go ahead and get this thing in paint today if I possibly can. And so I'm going to put Precleaner down. I'm still going to start looking for problems. I can always go back in and pre-clean if I fix a problem, but it's really hard to go back in and redo everything after you've painted the car or the engine bay. And that's all we're doing here. We're just painting this engine bay. So we're going to pre-clean all the surfaces that are going to get black. Now this on a Falcon does not get black beyond this point right here. This will be body color from here all the way up onto the surface of the vehicle. So you'll only have black below here. I will overspray some onto this area up here in black and then cover it over with the maroon that we're going to be painting the car with in a spray can just to get that under paint. But that's not going to be today. That'll be sometimes this coming weekend whenever I can get to it. And I'm just going to wipe this all down with Precleaner right now to get all the loose, dusty stuff out of the way. All the way down into here. And I'm going to go around and do the whole vehicle. This is what my cloth, and I'm just using paper towels because, again, this is a driver. I'm not doing a full concours paint job. You can see how dirty this thing's coming up just from the wipes that I've been doing so far. And everything should get touched by this because you don't know what has been in this engine bay. If you have of a mind, you should probably get some tack cloths and tack cloth it as well. I do not have any tack cloths. I am just going to do a diaper wipe, and I'll show you that after I get all this done. Now, some areas on this where I used the Evapor Rust and the areas where we had rust coming back up, where I covered it in Evapor Rust, I am going to hit it with a little bit of acetone just to make sure that everything's good. Same procedure as this, same kind of cloth. I'm just going to rub the acetone on it and make sure that everything feels good, doesn't have any kind of weird tack to it that could cause a problem with paint lift later on. I'm not saying that would happen with the Evapor Rust. I don't know. I've not used it a ton. So I'm going to take the cautionary step of acetoning it because that will take literally all the oils out of the way. Little pieces like this, when you're doing paper towels, that's going to be an issue. If you don't find it, it'll get stuck in the paint and it's going to be a bare spot because it'll cover up the actual finish. Bye. All right, we have all the doors in this place open, and of course, it's begun to be a windy day because of it. We are going to use Rust-Oleum. I hope it messes up. Nah, 60s metal. It's not going to mess it up. We're going to be using Rust-Oleum, their high-performance enamel for this. I know a lot of you guys put in some great suggestions on paint to use in this case, but when it boiled down to bottom brass tacks, Logan just decided he wanted to do the spray can stuff because it's easier to repair and it's just readily available. We tried to get some Rustoleum Semi Gloss Black in a quart so that we could gun spray it. nothing was available at the store. And right now in 2023, June of this year, we've had a bit of a problem with materials on paint. So keep that in your mind when you're doing this. And of course, when we're shooting this, airplanes are flying over. It's a good time had by all. All right, I'm going to run through this real quickly and talk to you about what I typically do on something like this. I'll look it over before I start painting and pick a point to start at. Now on this one, for just ease of my being able to get used to it, I'm going to start in an area where I have something that will cover up parts of what I do. I'm going to work from the front of the engine bay at the radiator core support, come up on that apron that's already got the EDM on it, and then work my way to the back over there, and then come around this corner and come all the way to the front over here, and then do the radiator core support last, because I may have to come into the engine bay through the radiator core support, so I don't want to do anything to this until the very last thing. The same thing is I'll paint the inside of this probably after I get everything rocking and rolling. So I'm going to go ahead and mask up and get going on this, and we'll see how it turns out. Because you probably won't be able to hear me real well now. I also like these cans that we're using because they're spray in any direction, theoretically. I've already got a few runs in this. I'm not used to these bigger cans. I should have lightened up a little bit. And the bad thing about Rust-Oleum is it's really hard to go in and repair this. You have to wait about 6-7 days for Rust-Oleum to truly dry up. So if I'm going to repair some of these areas, I'm going to have to wait a little bit before I do it. All right, that's my first coat-ish. Now, one thing I will say is I suck with spray cans. I'm not much better with a spray gun. And what's going on for me here is that I'm getting too close to the material, with the material to the panel itself, and that's causing me to get some runs in the finish. While running is not bad, running in here is definitely not good. It's not as bad as I've done before, but it's not my best work either. So probably what I would do if I were you would be to put a primer coat down with some Rust-Oleum primer and then come back in and refinish with a Semi Gloss Black. I wanted to kind of do this like Ford did it and not do a primer coat, but I think that would have helped with the runs I'm seeing in the finish right now. It's not horrible, but it's not great either. Two cans of paint to do that engine bay. You have to get further away than I'm used to, and you have to go a little slower than I'm used to whenever I'm spraying with a spray gun. Not saying I'm any better to spray gun, but I have a little bit better feel for the spray gun than I do sometimes on these big cans of Rust-Oleum because they're a round spray pattern, not a flat pattern. It's a really good excuse. I'm sticking with it. All right, so there it is. I would give myself a solid C- on this one. I was having some real struggles with trying to know how far away to put the nozzle of the gun from the finish itself, and so I've got some runs in some areas. I don't know if Logan's happy enough with it, I'll probably leave it alone, but if you don't want to leave it alone and you're doing this kind of work, do yourself a favor and give it about 7 to 8 days to dry before you try to go in and do anything to it, because after this stuff dries up, it's not completely dry, and then when you try to work it, you're going to craze the finish that's already on the car when you go in and try to respray after you do your cleanup of your spots where you've got runs in the finish or whatever. So wait about 7 to 8 days and then try to go in and refinish it. If you don't wait, you're going to end up with some issues trying to spray over it. And that's really it. That's the only thing about it, using the Rust-Oleum paint. I like the Rustoleum Semi Gloss. It works out well enough for a car like this. It's just going to see street driver duty. I know a lot of guys send in some nice stuff, and I appreciate you guys doing that. But at the end of the day, the Rust-Oleum went out because he's expeditious. He wants this done. So there you go. Finally, folks, do me a favor and go and check out the Patreon account. At the $10 a month level, you get monthly meetings with me on Zoom. It's a great way to support the channel on a monthly basis. When you do that, you're helping me to bring these young guys in here and work with me on the cars, learn how to operate cameras. We've got Darren here as a part-time employee. I'm really excited about that, and that can only happen if you help us out. This is a business venture, not a hobby. And so we're trying to teach capitalism around here. And if we don't have capital, we can't ism. I don't know what that means either. Check out the Patreon account. Also, do me a favor, you know where I'm heading for this, folks? We're going to go into Super Thanks. That's right. The best idea with the worst name YouTube ever came up with. It's a great way for you to do a one-time thing where you say, man, that episode where you screwed up the paint in Logan's car, that episode was so impactful to me. I laughed, I cried, I peed my pants a little. I'm giving you money. $1, $1.5 million, it's up to you. I know that there's a Jeff Bezos level character out there who has $1.5 million just sitting in the bank waiting for a place like this to support. We are waiting for you. Finally, folks, be kind to each other, love each other, treat each other nice. You guys have a great week. We'll see you on down the road, or on down the road, because you know. Great. I got to push this thing out in the sun. Yeah, mule. It's easy now. There's nothing in it. Well, maybe not easy, but easier. Over the top, out into the sun. If you squint, it doesn't look that bad.